Hello and welcome to The Quest on Rajya Sabha TV. I'm Rakhee Bakshee. This show gives you a deep insight into the life, career and vision of a leading personality. And the leading personality this time with us is an author, a veteran journalist and a commentator, Mr. Mark Tully. Sir Mark Tully, welcome to the show, The Quest.
Thank you very much.
You know, I was wondering, you wanted to be a priest and we're talking to a journalist right now.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I did want to be a priest. I'm still very interested in religion. But when I went to the seminary, I was told after 2 terms that I'd better look for something else to do because I wasn't suitable to be a priest.
So before we start actually talking about a whole lot of issues which are very relevant here in India, especially governance, let's talk about your journey. Now being a journalist, being an Indian, you've said, I was reading about you and you've said, talking about being more Indian than an Indian is something that why one should say about. So
No, I'm not more Indian than an Indian. I absolutely not. No,
so how were the years in UK and then here in India?
I was educated mainly in Britain. My parents are British. My childhood in India for 9 years was a very British childhood. We didn't play with Indian children. We went to a school which was entirely for British children. We didn't learn any Indian languages. And you can't get rid of that. And I wouldn't want to get rid of it. I even served in the British Army for 2 years. So I regard myself as British, but much influenced by India.
And why journalism, as a career finally?
Accident. I never particularly wanted to be a journalist. I often think now I wish I hadn't become a journalist. I think that the problem with us journalists is that we write about everyone else and criticize everyone else, but we never do anything ourselves.
And then you turned into an author. You've written a number of books now. So how has this journey been?
Well, that writing books really came after I left, no, not entirely after I left the BBC. When I was in the BBC, I wrote my first 2 books. Just seemed to be a natural progression from journalism, but it's much harder work. And now I've written about 7 books, and I'm not at all sure whether I'll write another one.
Yeah, but there are so many other things that keeps you engaged, I'm sure, especially thinking about how things are here in India. And we're talking to you certainly at a time that India is witnessing a lot of change, let's say politically. Having seen a lot of things and with your experience, how would you look at India today in terms of this whole change that it is going through?
Well, one thing I really welcome is I think that even politicians now are sitting up and waking up to the fact that something has to be done to improve governance. And not much has happened about it except RTI, right to information, but they really are beginning to realize this. And I think one of the things about the Aam Aadmi movement is that people think it's merely focused on corruption, but I don't think it is. It is also focused on reform of the system. And I think this is something, I hope, is the beginning of something which is long, long overdue, which is reform of governance in this country.
So do you think finally governance is an issue which is now in the forefront? People are discussing, people are more aware. Do you think people in India are now more aware?
Yes, I think they are more aware of this problem and they are really wanting change. You know, when you talk to people, for instance, about what is happening in the political scene at the moment, everyone talks about we need change. And that seems to be the big thing that people are talking about.
But with, again, your long years of experience, how would you look at corruption today, which is now, again into focus? Something which was already there. You've seen things earlier also in decades. Now it is kind of being discussed as a big issue. How would you look at it in a perspective down the years?
Well, corruption has always been an issue ever since I came to India in 1965, and it's gone up the scale in its importance and then gone down. It's fluctuated. But for the last 5 years or more, it's been a really major issue, and you've had 2 big movements against corruption. You had the Anna movement, and now you've got the Kejriwal, the Aam Aadmi movement, and clearly people are responding to this. But I've always said, and I believe it firmly, that corruption is really a symptom of something. It's not the actual disease or illness or weakness itself. That I would come back to again and say is bad governance. Because if you get bad governance, then corruption automatically comes about. The other thing which I think causes corruption is overcomplication. The bureaucracy in India loves to write laws and rules which they think cover every possible circumstance. Well, it's not possible to do that. If you do that, you just create complications. And also the bureaucracy in this country is still far too much, not just in its shape, but in its attitude, a reflection of the British colonial bureaucracy.
Do you think it has been happening down the years and there's no change as far as bureaucracy is concerned?
No, there have been minor changes, but this is basically still the situation, I think.
And now of course every political party also talks about the poor as such and talks about upliftment of lives for those downtrodden and marginalized. You've reported a lot during Indiraji's time. You keep referring to her time also. How would you look at the political situation, the kind of focus on those who were not so privileged and now? I mean, would you see any kind of pattern to it? Would you see any shift? How would you compare the times?
Well, Indira Gandhi, of course, her politics were largely built on her concern for the poor, the impression that she gave. After all, she had that famous slogan, Garibi Hatao. Yeah. When she broke the Congress party, she broke it by appealing to the poor and by taking actions which she thought the poor would approve of. So there is no doubt about it that this issue was there then and the same issue is there now. And in many ways I see in Sonia Gandhi's NA National Advisory Council something which is very much modelled on the way that Indira Gandhi used to do her politics.
And how would you look at politics today in India as such? We are talking about elections, which is very much on our head now. Political parties, when it comes to elections, just target each other. They have all kinds of languages that they use. But how would you look at the correct issues that should be addressed and the way one should look at the elections or political parties that the kind of path they should take?
Well, I think political parties are in a strange position in India at the moment because there's not much which is doctrinaire about them. For instance, we don't have a party which really fully supports market capitalism, something a right of centre type party. The BJP was that, but it seems to have gone away from that now. So everyone seems to be fighting over the same ground, really. And as a result of this, parties, instead of being policy-oriented, politics have become personality-oriented. I think is a big
that's
problem.
A very pertinent point that you're making. Of course, we have to take a very short break now here in the Quest. We are talking to Sir Mark Tully here in this conversation. We'll keep talking to him about other issues, but right now we're taking a very short break. Don't go away. Keep watching. Welcome back to the show. You're watching The Quest. We are in conversation with Sir Mark Tully. Taking this conversation further on governance. What, according to you, as a political observer, are the key points, 2 or 3 key points, if I want you to name, that should be looked at today in India?
Well, I think one thing, of course, which should be looked at is the division between politicians and bureaucrats, too much political interference in the bureaucracy. There has to be a relationship between the two. You can't have an absolutely hard line down the middle of it. But, we've had this controversial transfer out of the blue of the health secretary, for instance. Well, that gives everyone the impression, rightly or wrongly, that politicians have been interfering in the work of the bureaucracy. That's one thing. The second thing is that no democracy can really function unless it has a legal system which gives reasonably speedy redressal for people who have grievances and also deals speedily with people who are brought to trial by the police. It is absolutely essential that the legal system in this country is changed in such a way that trials speed up and that we don't have this horrendous problem of, I think, about 75% of the population of Tihar jail being under trial, and people being held under trial longer than the actual sentence.
So judiciary, which is very, very speedy and proactive.
Yeah, we need that very much indeed. And another thing I think we need the revival of the morale of the civil service and of all the government services, so that when people are unfairly treated by the government, then the civil service itself backs them.
You know, you talked about politics being more personality oriented rather than being policy oriented, and I would agree there. But there are parties like BJP, which is looking at one person, and the same that you're talking about, a personality, Mr. Modi, and they're he's the one that is BJP, he's the one who will take the country ahead. How would you look at that?
Well, that is personality politics. Congress is promoting very, very strongly Rahul Gandhi. That is personal politics. In Uttar Pradesh, you have a struggle between two personalities, Mayawati and Mulayam. In Tamil Nadu, you have the same sort of situation. So it's everywhere.
I mean, what I was trying to get from you is that, you know, for example, when Mr. Modi says that there is a state that he has governed, and then he cites the example of his state, Gujarat model of government that he'll ensure, how would you look at that kind of politics that he wants to bring?
Well, I think in some ways that sort of politics is very good, in that he is concentrating on performance, and that he has realized that people want governments which perform, want working governments which achieve things. So in that way, it's very good. Of course, there are many arguments, though, about whether actually Gujarat has performed as well as Mr. Modi says it has performed. But the fact that the emphasis is on performance is, I think, a positive thing.
But if you look at the recent past, and I would remember that, you know, this whole Aam Aadmi slogan was actually started by Congress Party in 2004, when they looked at their whole campaign was looking at it. So how would you look at this whole Aam Aadmi agenda coming into fore now?
Well, the Aam Aadmi, as I said, has been there for a very long time. You know, we talked about Indira Gandhi's Garibi Hatao. The Aam Aadmi has come into focus now.
What I mean is this whole participative kind of politics.
But that's the new thing, is that it is much more participative, and I think this is something, again, which is very positive.
You know, one person, of course, and one party which is being talked about, which is being said that it has created a new idiom in politics, is Aam Aadmi Party. But some would say that it's been quite sad to see how it governed for a few days and then it went away from Delhi. How would you look at it?
Well, I think it's pursued a very clever political policy myself. I think it has come to power in Delhi. It has shown that it's not going to be like any other party. Yeah. Now, that has put off a lot of people in the middle classes, but I'm not sure that it's put off people in the poorer people who supported the Aam Aadmi Party in great numbers. And then he has now, Kejriwal has been able to give the impression that he is a martyr.
What I'm trying to gather from you also is that the key point is that it's nice to have good intentions and to start on that, but to actually understand the system and, you know, try and make a change through that system is not really very easy. So if you talk about Mr. Kejriwal as an example in this whole systemic kind of fabric that he was supposed to be working in, how would you look at that?
Well, as I said, I mean, I think you've got to look at the politics of the thing and look at what he was trying to do. What he was trying to do was to demonstrate that the system as it stands now is anti-poor, basically. And that he was not like other politicians, that he was not kursi ka lalach, greedy for power. And that's what he was trying to do.
How do you deliver? That's my
question. But that's a different question. The first point to remember about him is that what he was trying to do. Now, obviously, if he comes to power for any length of time, he will either have to make significant changes in the way government functions, or he will fall flat on his face, because the same corrupt officials, the same corrupt and useless system will bring him down. So he will have two alternatives. But at the moment, we're only looking at the very early stage in the life of the Aam Aadmi Party.
So also looking at the polity, that how it functions in India and how people look at it that you vote a politician or leader to power, it's democracy here, and then you want certain promises that he or his party or she or her party makes, those to be delivered. That's how traditionally it functions. So how would you look at it that, the gap sometimes which comes in? You get power, how much do you deliver?
Well, this is really the great problem of politics, and this is why people are disillusioned with politicians, because they make promises and they don't deliver them. And then when they do deliver them, the implementation of them is weak and marred by corruption. That's why people get fed up with politicians, and that's why Kejriwal either has to alter the system or fall flat on his face.
Exactly.
If he ever came to power.
Yeah. In this polls, how would you look at the scenario? Would you see any major changes? Would you see, as some are saying, that big names and then which candidate will fight against whom? There is a third front scenario coming in. How would you look at the kind of change we'll see in this particular polls, 2014?
Well, the new factor is the Aam Aadmi Party, and we've got to see whether that builds on its success in Delhi, builds on what...
Do you think nationally it will have an impact?
I don't know. It's far too early to tell. I think we have to remember that elections are very difficult to read. Only very, very recently there was an article, an excellent article in the Indian Express about the early days of Indira Gandhi, in which Inder Malhotra, who is one of the most experienced journalists, pointed out that nobody foresaw the Indira wave in the election of 1971. Nobody foresaw that wave. So foreseeing and telling election results in India is a very dangerous occupation.
I guess so. But what about third front or this alternative front that keeps...
Well, that's been there before. There's nothing new in there,
Do you think it will take a shape this time?
There are many problems in the third front coming together. There are rivalries between leaders, and there are differences of policies as well. Can the left, for instance, be accommodated in the third front when many of the leaders don't believe in the left's economic policies? There are all sorts of problems like that.
Yeah. So on that note, again, we are taking a very short break, but we are still talking to Sir Mark Tully, and we'll come back again very shortly. Don't go away. So you're watching The Quest, and we are talking to Sir Mark Tully, and we're talking about issues that actually confront India as such. Having been in UK and in India, how would you look at democracy taking shape here in India now? I mean, or I would say getting strengthened now. This is something that India is really proud of. But we are right now talking when Parliament session is on. How do you look at this whole democratic fabric getting ahead here in India?
Well, I think democracy is deep-rooted in this country, and one of the things I've always said about India is this tremendous achievement of having had so many elections, not just parliamentary, state elections as well. And you've never had this problem of a party which has been defeated in an election refusing to accept defeat. The classic example, of course, when Indira Gandhi still retained the power of emergency when she was defeated in 1977, but she accepted the defeat and walked away. And that is a hugely important thing, because if you look around the world, so often parties don't accept defeats and then they start rioting and all the rest of it. You have the problem frequently in our neighbouring country of Bangladesh, for instance. So I think democracy itself is deeply rooted in this country, but I do think that the way that the people who are elected, they really do need to think about how they behave. For instance, what has been happening in Parliament is really something which is very sad, I would say, because here are parliamentarians claiming privileges, claiming that they are members of the highest, most important body in the country, and then shouting and screaming at each other, and no work is taking place. No debates are taking place. If you look back in the history of the Indian Parliament, wonderful speeches have been made, wonderful debates have taken place.
What is the reason of this kind of, I would say, decay in terms of this whole, moral fabric that should exist actually?
Well, it's very difficult to tell, because I would have thought that politicians would sit back and say to themselves, look, we can't go on like this. This is just making us look very stupid in front of our own people who elect us, and we're not doing our duty by behaving in this way. I would have thought that politicians might have behaved like that. And I'd have thought...
No, for example, you've been talking about a leader like Indira Gandhi, who knew how to kind of be a good leader in terms of administration. Sometimes you have to build consensus and then you take everybody ahead. So all these qualities that make you finally a good leader. Would you look at leadership issues now?
No, I wouldn't look at leadership issues. No, and after all, Indira Gandhi did declare an emergency, and that was not a very democratic act. No, I would look at the reform of the situation, of the system. That would be one thing which I would really look at. I would look at, for instance, why don't we have something like Prime Minister's question hour in Parliament, so that really there is a genuine opportunity to question the government. I think very often, not always, but very often, the fault does lie on the government by not really allowing the debate that the opposition want to have to take place.
What are the changes? I mean, for example, we had RTI, and we talk about such revolutionary things that have happened recently in India. We are talking about people's anger coming on the street. In fact, dharna is a new phenomena here in India now. Everybody who is not happy with something sits on a dharna. How do you look at this phase that we're going through now?
Well, again, dharna has been there for a long time, and I remember back in the 60s.
Do we have more dharnas than ever?
When I remember back in the 60s, there was a tremendous dharna or jalsa or jalus, or call it, when all the sadhus came into Delhi, and everyone got terribly alarmed and thought, what on earth is going to happen? Dharnas come and dharnas go. Provided dharnas are not violent, I think that they are a legitimate way of protesting and of expressing. But I do think people need to think more carefully before they go on dharnas, and every petty issue should not be leading to a dharna.
Because I personally would say the numbers seems to be a little rising, and also when the CM of a state sits on a dharna, how would you look at that?
Well, I find it strange, definitely, yes. It is strange that a CM sits in a dharna. It's strange that a CM in Andhra Pradesh is opposing his own parent government's policies.
Coming back to your profession of being in journalism for such a long time, what are the phases or episodes that really kind of you got engaged more in and that kind of shook you somewhere?
Well, I don't know that I have ever been that shaken, really.
You felt more engaged. I mean, we are journalists and we do things impartially. We just keep on reporting as it comes to us. But sometimes we kind of get a little, I would say, touched, or we kind of get something out of it.
Well, I mean, I've been saddened very often. I was saddened by the Bhopal gas disaster, which I thought was an appalling example of an accident which was totally man-made and should never have happened. I was saddened when I was covering Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's execution, because I knew that his trial was a total fraud. I was saddened when I was thrown out of India during the emergency, obviously. And again, one is often saddened when one sees examples of bad governance and of corruption and that sort of thing.
But all this talk of democracy globally, looking at India, Pakistan, how would you look at things now? I mean, how do you think the road is kind of going ahead?
For India and Pakistan, well, I wish I could be optimistic about it. We've appeared to be getting underway towards something, both under Narasimha Rao, under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and indeed under Manmohan Singh as well. And we haven't got anywhere. And I think it's very sad. What both these countries really need to realize is that the harm and damage they're doing to themselves by continuing this quarrel with each other. And Pakistan blames it all on India, India blames it all on Pakistan. Neither side can totally escape blame for this situation.
But in India now, talking about this whole talk of communal politics, how would you look at that?
Well, I think that communal politics is never going to get very far in India, because I believe that Indians and India is naturally a secular country in the best sense of the word. And by that I do not mean an anti-religious country. I think it's a deeply religious country, but it's a country whereby its tradition allows many, many different religions to flourish. And so
but in India, we vote based on so many considerations, religion, caste, so many class, so many barriers that we have in terms of electing our own.
Even if you voted on this basis, and even if you voted on this basis, it does not mean that you have become intolerant of each other's religions, even if you vote on this sort of basis. And there should be laws in place, proper laws, with speedy trials for people who really spread religious hatred. But even there, when you see what's happened to Wendy Doniger's book on Hinduism, you have to be very careful about these laws. They cannot be used as the blasphemy law is used in Pakistan, or as some people want to use laws in this country to stop
How do you feel when any writers or any book which is kind of banned or has a shadow on? How do you feel?
Well, I think it's a very sad thing usually. There's been a book written a year or so ago, or more than a year or so ago, about Sri Aurobindo. Now, Sri Aurobindo is considered by people to be one of the outstanding Indian thinkers of the 20th century. Some people didn't like one or two things said in the book and tried to get the whole book banned. That sort of thing is bad and should not be allowed to happen by the courts. The cases should be thrown out.
Mm-hmm. And as we're wrapping up, I would like to refer to your book, No Full Stops in India. So what kind of full stop or no full stop would you look at now in India?
None.
It goes on.
I still think there are no full stops in India.
Okay. So thank you so much for talking to us, sparing your time, and all the best for whatever you wish to do, whether you want to write a book or whether you want to just enjoy the sun outside. All the best for doing all that, Sir Mark Tully. So thank you so much for talking to us in this program, and hope you like this particular edition of The Quest. Thank you for watching. Namaskar and bye-bye.